Adam Higginbotham dropped by today to talk about midnight in Chernobyl. This is the anniversary of the Chernobyl meltdown. Check it out. It's fascinating. Leave your comments, ding the bell, and subscribe to our channel. Adam Higginbotham is with us. He has a new book out, Midnight in Chernobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster. He's a journalist, contributor to Wired, GQ, New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, Smithsonian, etc. His Twitter handle is Higginbotham A. And Adam Higginbotham, INBOTHAM.com is the website. Adam, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
I love your book. I was telling the story 2 hours ago when I was teasing that you were going to be on the show here in the third hour, that I flew into Frankfurt, Germany the week after Chernobyl melted down, and in a rainstorm, and came out of the train station in downtown Frankfurt, and it got soaked, by the way. But there were no cars on the streets. There were no pedestrians. It was like the entire city was evacuated. I'd never seen Frankfurt like that in my life. And when I walked 2 blocks to a hotel, when I got to the hotel, the clerk was just all flipped out that I had walked and gotten wet, because he said it was Chernobyl rain that was falling on us. And he took my coat and said he was going to have it cleaned for me. And he said, go up to your room right now and take a shower and, throw away your clothes. And it was weird. But I think that was like May 2nd or 3rd or something like that. Whatever the day was, it was, I remember it quite vividly. And then we moved to Germany about 4 months later. But you wrote this brilliant book, Midnight in Chernobyl. I love the book. Just give us a recap of what happened 33 years ago today.
Well, I mean, the simple version is that the staff of the fourth reactor of 4 at the Chernobyl plant were conducting a safety test that should have been completed before the reactor was brought online in the first place, almost 3 years earlier. And during the course of the safety test, they inadvertently brought the reactor into an unstable condition. And a series of design defects that the designers of the reactor had known about for years, but had successfully covered up and kept, often even from the people who were operating it, came together with the instabilities that they caused because of the test, and what they call a reactor runaway started, where the fission reaction inside the core of the reactor just ran out of control in a matter of split seconds, resulting in a massive explosion, and then the reactor disintegrated, the roof of the building was destroyed, there was no containment building, so this huge pillar of radioactive contamination escaped immediately into the atmosphere and was snatched away by high-altitude winds and began its journey around all of the northern hemisphere. The reactor caught fire, and radioactive contamination began pouring out of the reactor and wouldn't stop for months. Contaminating not only the area immediately around, but much of Western Europe.
One of the things that baffled me, and maybe I just, most nuclear reactors that I know of are built on rivers or bodies of water so that they can use them for cooling. Was that not the case at Chernobyl?
It was. It was built right beside the River Pripyat.
Oh, it was? Okay. In that case, I've been operating on, for years I've been trying to figure, okay, I was wrong. So what have we learned from this? And have we applied any of these lessons to nuclear power over the years?
Well, I mean, part of the problem with attempting to draw lessons from it is really that the chief lesson would be, don't build nuclear reactors like they did in the Soviet Union.
Right.
But in the West, we've never built nuclear reactors like they did in the Soviet Union. This was a model that existed only in the USSR and was built along principles that were originally developed to manufacture plutonium. And it was innately unstable. And then on top of these innate instabilities, they developed these further design defects, and this was complicated by the levels of secrecy that enveloped all of the Soviet nuclear program.
Yeah. And
so it meant that this was a kind of one-off historical event. So I think that it's hard to draw incredibly direct lessons from this particular reactor accident, but I think that the broader lessons are those of the hubris and overconfidence in technology that characterized this accident. They were convinced, the operators of the power station and the managers of the plant and the leaders of the Soviet nuclear industry had successfully convinced everybody involved that this was as an extremely safe piece of equipment to operate.
Yeah.
And it was that really laid the path to the accident as much as anything else.
Well, Louise and I and our kids moved to Germany in June of 1986. 3 months later, or a couple months later, and much to my wife's embarrassment, I bought a little handheld Geiger counter. It was a model that was made by the folks at the farm in Somerville, Tennessee. And I would, and when we were living there, two things that I noticed. The first was that the German government standards, maximum cesium radiation in milk, was originally, as I recall, 5 becquerels per liter. They raised that to 50, then they raised that to 500, if I'm remembering correctly. You probably have this in your book, or you probably know these numbers right off the top of your head. And so I would go to the supermarket. We were living in Steinach up in the northern Frankenwald, and the nearest big town was Kulmbach, and we'd go to the Kulmbach to the supermarket, and I'd walk around the store with my Geiger counter. And it was incredible because it would just go tick, 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 tick. And then you walk by mushrooms and it would go brrr, You walk by the milk counter and it would go bip, 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 bip. And every now and then you get some weird thing. I mean, one that particularly weirded me out was apricots. Apricots were radioactive. And, and this was by Christmas time. I mean, this was like 6, 8 months later. And it turned out that the apricots had come from Turkey, I guess it was, or some place in the Middle East that must have gotten some kind of dump of radiation. I saw all this in real time, and I wasn't the only person running around with a Geiger counter in Europe at the time. And we also walking through the forests, just very rarely, but every now and then you'd find a hot spot, and it would be some little particle of something that was just, producing enough radiation that my Geiger counter would start making noise in my pocket. How lasting has that impact been? What effect has it had on people from the Chernobyl blast zone all the way out as far as the rest of Europe and Russia? And where are we at now 33 years later?
Well, if you want to talk about food, I mean, if you go hunting wild boar in the forests of southern Germany now, and you manage to bag something, then you won't be allowed to eat it because the boar is still too radioactive for human consumption.
Wow.
So, I mean, there are certainly, the radioactivity remains in the food chain, not merely within the exclusion zone, which is 30 kilometers out roughly from the power plant itself.
Right.
But, all over areas of Europe that were hit by fallout in the wake of the accident. I mean, it remains in the ecosystem to this day. And as for the wider health effects, and part of the problem with describing those is that the Soviet government did all they could to obfuscate the situation from the outset. They either falsified medical records or didn't take readings in the first place. And so the beginnings of the chain of data that we might otherwise have, were either never picked up or were lost originally. And because of the complications of epidemiology and radiobiology, it's extremely difficult at this point to tell how many people were really directly affected by it. And so all we have are these estimates that have been produced by numerous scientific studies over the years, which range from the UN estimates that were produced in 2008 and then subsequently of around 5,000 extra deaths from cancer directly attributable to that radioactivity that was released in '86, out of a population of an affected area of 5 million. On one hand, and then on the other hand, you have organizations like Greenpeace who will place the numbers of deaths up in the hundreds of thousands.
Wow, hundreds of thousands. This really should speak to all of us. The other thing that I learned from having lived there right after Chernobyl melted down, and I was working with an international relief organization that was headquartered there, and so I get back there pretty much every year and have in all these years since then. I didn't get back last year, but and watching, and I speak German, and so, watching the German public opinion turn against nuclear power, which led to the 100,000 rooftop, solar program and this massive solarization of Germany now. And I believe over the next few years, they're going to be shutting down the last of the nuclear reactors in Germany. It's happening all over Europe, this antipathy toward nuclear power. We haven't had that kind of a thing here in the United States outside of 3 Mile Island that was probably amplified by the fact that it came out the same, that happened right after the movie China Syndrome came out. But we've got 30 plus of the Mark V reactors, the GE boiling water reactors that are identical to the Fukushima reactor here operating in the United States. We've got others that are kind of sketchy. We've got a lot of them now that we're redrawing our flood zones from 500-year floods are becoming 50-year floods or maybe even 10-year floods, things like that, where they might be able to take out nuclear power. Do you see a difference in the rethinking of nuclear power in the United States versus Europe as a consequence of Chernobyl, or other parts of the world? We have about a minute left here, Adam.
I think that that the anti-nuclear movement had already set in after 3 Mile Island, and Chernobyl just kind of added an extra impetus to it. Mm-hmm. But you've got to remember that in France, for instance, they still make 75% of their electricity from nuclear power.
Yeah,
so
they build out that infrastructure really very aggressively.
Yeah, I think it's country by country.
Yeah.
And obviously, there were nuclear plants that were scheduled to be built after Chernobyl that were cancelled. So I mean, it did happen here.
Right.
It just hasn't happened as drastically as it did in, say, Germany, I think.
Where is France going with their nuclear program?
That's an excellent question. I do not know the answer to. I don't think they're going to change anything. I think it's worked for them. They haven't had any accidents of this scale. Mm. It's a successful clean energy source for them, relatively speaking. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that they export this stuff to Germany.